Let's understand what machine learning is in this one very clearly. We will understand the concept behind it. We will also understand it by comparing how machine learning is different from traditional computer programming. All right. So, what is machine learning? The term machine learning itself has been around for quite a while. It has been around since 1959, even though it got more popular more recently. The term itself has been around for a very long time. It was first put forth by Arthur Samwell, right? So, who is Arthur Samwell? He's the very first guy who wrote a program that can learn to play a game on its own. So, he wrote the very first computer program that can learn to play the game of checkers on its own. So, what this means to us is this is probably the very first demonstration of artificial intelligence in action. So, how he has defined machine learning is it is a field of study that gives computers the ability to learn without being explicitly programmed. And that is the main difference between machine learning and traditional computer programming itself, being explicitly programmed. While this is the formal definition given by Arthur Samwell, let's look at a more practical definition for us to understand in today's context. So, a more practical definition is machine learning typically uses some sort of an algorithm, and that algorithm typically works on some sort of a data that you give it as an input. So the algorithm learns the relationships and the patterns that exist in the data to automatically answer certain questions or perform certain tasks. This is how most of the machine learning in today's world exists and functions. Before we jump into how machine learning works, let's understand how traditional computer programming can be used for the purpose of problem solving. We will understand this with an example of classifying a given email. You have an input email, you want to classify it as either a spam or a regular email, which we call as the ham. We want to do this task. How we would approach it in traditional computer programming. Typically, to solve this type of a problem, you will have an expert involved. This expert will come in. It can be one person, it can be a group of person, but this expert will come in and gives you a certain frame of rules based on which your logic should work. So these rules are first established. The expert comes in and defines these rules. These rules get transcoded into a computer program. So this gets coded into a computer program. Then to this computer program, you give an input data. The input data here is an email, any incoming email. Right? You give this to the program. The program in turn gives you back the answer. The answer is whether that program is a ham or a spam. Now, while this is quite straightforward, there's a small problem with this approach. The problem is, as the time goes by, the nature of the spam emails that gets passed to the users changes over time. And as the nature of the spam gets changed, you need to update the rules that was once described by the experts. And the developers need to be always on their toes to update these rules as early as possible. And as the rules grow, it can become more complex over time. Now let's look at how machine learning works. Let's look at how we would solve the same problem using a machine learning based approach. In ML based approach, this whole thing happens in two different stages. In stage one, we call it the training stage. Stage one is the training stage. Stage two is the scoring stage. What happens in training? In training, you have a machine learning algorithm. To this algorithm, you give both an input data as well as the answers to all the entries in your input data. So in this case, the input data is the collection of emails that you might already have. You need to have a very good collection of emails, and for each of those emails, you also show the answers, whether a given email is either a spam or a ham. All right. So from the past, you would get this data. You give this to the machine learning algorithm. It trains on this to map a given email to whether it is a spam or a ham. It creates this mapping by understanding the relationships and the patterns that exist. On the completion of the training, it will give you back a set of rules. This rules is what we call as the ML model, machine learning model. Now, once this machine learning model is created, you can give a new input data to this model. This new input could be either one single email, or you can do it as a batch job where you pass in a bunch of emails to this ML model, but it will score it one at a time. So you send in the new emails to this ML model and it will score it and give you back the answers where it will tell you for each of the emails whether it is a spam or a ham. So this is the whole process. First, in stage one, the ML algorithm trains using the input as well as the answers to create an ML model, right? Then you use the ML model and new input data, just the input, not the answers. You pass this input to your ML model, it scores and gives you back the answer for each of the emails that you passed in into the input. Now, here, that's a significant advantage. As time passes by, your input data collection as well as the corresponding answers to it grows with time. Because for every email that you are sending to your users, the users might be marking a given email as a spam if in case it is a spam. So your input grows with time and you can schedule your algorithm to train on the updated input on a periodic basis. So here the expert intervention can be reduced. I'm not saying we can completely eliminate it. We can reduce the expert intervention. So that's a major advantage that you have with machine learning based approach. Now let's compare and contrast. In traditional programming, the rules that you create are sort of static in nature, whereas in machine learning based approach, you can retrain it at periodic intervals, so your approach itself becomes dynamic. The expert skill needed in traditional approach is much higher compared to what you have with machine learning based approach. All right, so that is also a major advantage. Now, to the downside, it's not really a downside, but the machine learning based approach is dependent on the availability of high quality data. And if you think about it, most of the companies that is having this sort of a service has high quality data available with them also. Most of the internet companies, right? So you definitely need the data, but in traditional programming, you do not really have to have the data in order to get started. Well, that is a major advantage with traditional programming. Another thing is there is no separate training step. This step itself is not there. It is a static approach, right? So no training is needed. Whereas in ML based approach, you have a separate training step that typically happens periodically over time. So this consumes resources to learn. And the most important aspect of all about machine learning based approaches, the quality of the solution that you create using machine learning is heavily dependent on the quality of the data that you feed to your machine learning algorithm. But what exactly I mean by the quality of high quality data, it's not exactly what you think. It's not about how clean your data is. We will find out more about it in the next one.